Heidi was a typical 20-year-old woman. Her and her boyfriend had been living together for 2 years and decided that they were ready to start a family. They both had great jobs at a local law firm, and they were in the process of buying their first home. Once Heidi had become pregnant, though, things started to change. They were moving into their new house when Heidi was 3 months pregnant. She was carrying a box into the house, a light box, as her doctor had warned her of the damage pushing herself too far could cause. When she dropped to her knees on the porch, full of emotion, she couldn't believe this was going to be her house, her home, where her baby would grow. Heidi had not had the easiest childhood. Her mother and father did the best they could, and she was grateful for them. They were a loving family, but never had a lot of money for extra things, like latest clothes or summer vacations. Growing up this way may seem negative to some people, but Heidi thought it made her a better person. It made her appreciate things more. As a result of her not-so-idle upbringing, the day she and her boyfriend received the keys to their new home, she broke out in tears. Heidi walked into the foyer of their old Victorian-era house and was already picking out paint colors and decoration ideas. The day was full of unpacking, and the night ended with Heidi and her boyfriend curled up on their mattress on the floor. They were thinking of baby names, and they fell asleep in each other's arms. Heidi woke to her alarm, smiling as she looked around the bedroom that was littered with half-unpacked boxes. She took a shower, got dressed, and headed off to the office early. When she got back to her desk, she started to review a case that she had been assigned. She felt a slight pain in her abdomen. She brushed it off as hunger pains and went to the kitchen to grab a bagel. The pain stayed even after eating. She assumed it was normal in the first trimester, early second trimester, and would call the doctor if it continued. When she got home, her boyfriend was sitting on the porch swing with a drink in hand, smiling at her. There was a severe pain in her lower abdomen all of a sudden. She fell to her knees on the first step of the porch and let out a shriek. Her boyfriend came rushing to her aid. He walked her to the car, and they rushed to the hospital. Her vision became blurry, and she blacked out before they reached the ER. She woke up to the bright fluorescent lights of the hospital room. Her boyfriend was by her side, holding her hand with tears streaming down his cheeks. "Is the baby okay?" Heidi whispered. She reached under the blankets and placed her hand on her stomach. Her boyfriend didn't answer. He just looked at her and hung his head down. "Our baby didn't make it," he choked out through sobs. Heidi sat up in the bed, grabbing at her stomach. She let out a sorrowful scream and tried to stand up, but could only crumple into a miserable pile on the floor. Heidi was kept overnight for observation. The next morning, her boyfriend brought her fresh clothes, and they left the hospital. The car ride home was silent, and the air was thick with tension. "We can always try again," her boyfriend said as he grabbed her hand. She pulled away from him. "It's not that simple. I'm not ready to try again," Heidi mumbled, as she tried to stare blankly out of the car window. A tear slid down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it off. Her baby was gone. There was nothing that could bring him or her back. They walked up the stairs of their new house, and she flopped down on the couch. She felt so empty, so alone. The day went by slowly as she continued to unpack her belongings. They went to bed early. Heidi was nearly asleep, and she gingerly rubbed on her stomach, wishing it still held a developing baby. And suddenly a sharp pain. She yelped and sat up, hunched over. Her scream woke her boyfriend. "What's wrong, Heidi?" he asked frantically. She let out another yelp of pain. "It's my stomach," she whimpered. "I feel like something's ripping me apart." She stumbled to the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub. Her boyfriend appeared in the doorway. "This is probably normal considering the trauma your body just went through," he offered with a comforting voice. He turned on the faucet of the tub and prepared her bath for her. The warm water might help to soothe some of your pain. He knelt down in front of her and held her hands. Heidi nodded and got undressed. She eased herself into the water and closed her eyes. The pain did seem to be fading. After a few minutes, her eyes shot open and she started to scramble out of the water. She felt something in her stomach move. She looked down at the water and it was now a crimson sea of bubbles. Her boyfriend rushed to the bathroom and helped her get out of the tub. He wrapped a towel around her. "What happened? Are you okay?" he asked. I felt something move in my abdomen, Heidi said through her panicked breaths. "Well, I think in the morning we need to take you back to the OBGYN. Something just isn't right. Do you think you can wait that long?" he said. Heidi drained the bloody water from the tub and returned to bed. Her throat felt tight. She coughed a few times to see if it would help. It felt like she had something lodged in there. It was almost like she was choking. She drank some water, laid down, but couldn't get to sleep. The pain and the tightness of her throat gave her a very restless night. The next morning, she returned to the hospital to speak to her OBGYN. She assured her boyfriend she was fine to go alone and that he should get some rest. She checked into the front desk of the hospital and waited. She was coughing long, deep, ragged coughs constantly. The woman sitting by her moved down a few seats. Heidi rolled her eyes and shook her head. "Heidi Sorelli," a nurse announced as she looked over a chart. Heidi stood up, and the nurse took her to a room to wait for the doctor. The doctor entered, and Heidi explained everything that had transpired the night before. "The pain and the bleeding are normal. There's nothing to worry about. I think the cough and throat tightness are just stress. Stress is also to be expected when you go through a loss like you have," the doctor said as he placed a hand on her shoulder. Heidi felt silly that she had overreacted and looked down at the floor. "I'm going to prescribe you some Valium to help your nerves. I also recommend that you go home and get some much-needed sleep. Maybe take a few days off work to relax." The doctor handed her a prescription and sent her on her way. She got home and attempted to swallow one of the nerve pills. Her throat felt tight. It was like she was trying to swallow a baseball. She managed to get it down and shortly after fell asleep. Heidi woke up coughing violently. She couldn't stop. She covered her mouth and pulled back when she saw small droplets of blood in her hand. She decided she really needed a second opinion and decided to make an appointment with a second OBGYN. She didn't think coughing up blood was normal post-miscarriage. She called a neighboring town's hospital and drove to the ER. She coughed and hacked the whole drive. Her throat felt raw and dry. The nurse took her back as soon as Heidi told her the symptoms she was experiencing. "We're going to take a few x-rays, okay, sweetie?" the nurse said, rubbing her back. She could see the doctor and the nurse examining the x-rays very closely. The nurse let out a small shriek. The doctor stormed over to the x-ray table. "Get out of here, now!" he yelled. What's wrong with me?" Heidi asked. The doctor grabbed her by the arm and nearly threw her out of the doors of the hospital. "Don't ever come back here, do you understand me? This hospital doesn't help people like you." Heidi ran to her car and sped out of the parking lot. She got home and took another pill to help her sleep. The next morning she woke up and her throat wasn't tight anymore. She didn't feel any pain at all. Her boyfriend had left early to work on a complicated case at the firm. She got a glass of water and nearly choked as it slid down her throat. It still felt like something was lodged in the very back. She opened her mouth and looked in the mirror. She stuck her fingers down her throat to see if she could feel anything. She heard a loud crunching sound and felt intense pain in her fingers. She pulled her hand out of her mouth to find that the tips of her fingers were gone. Her pulse was racing and her breath quickened. She grabbed the towel and wrapped it around her fingers. She went to the kitchen and got her phone and opened the flashlight app. She didn't even feel the pain in her fingers. Her adrenaline was pumping. She opened her mouth and shined the light down her throat. Heidi saw the light reflect off of something in the very back. She decided that she would take a picture so she could see what was in her throat. She turned the flashlight on and snapped a pic. Heidi stared at the picture for a few minutes, with her jaw slack and hanging open. She screamed when she finally registered what was showing on the phone. She saw two large, hateful eyes, along with a mouth, of long, sharp teeth peeking out of the darkness. Heidi's phone slowly slipped out of her hands and fell to the floor.